Welcome to Break the Silence, Build the Future, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of survivors and advocates while shedding light on the pervasive issue of gender based violence. Join us on a journey where survivors find strength in sharing their stories and experts offer profound insight into this critical societal issue. Welcome back to another episode of Break the Silence, Build the Future. I'm your host, Fartumo Kusow. Today's episode is one I've been looking forward to sharing with you for such a long time. And my guest is Babs Walters, author, counselor, speaker, and truth teller. In her memoir, Facing the Jaguar, Babs shares her journey of breaking a silence she held for nearly 70 years. This is a story of trauma, healing, and the incredible courage it takes to confront your past, not just for yourself, but for everyone who needs to hear you are not alone. Babs, thank you very much for being here today and for joining me.
Thank you for holding this space for us, Fartumo.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining me. So, I want you to tell us who is Babs. If I didn't know you and you had to introduce yourself to me or to the audience, who is Babs?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question. My birth name is Barbara Walters. And as you can imagine, with a famous name like that, it's difficult to not have people think that my book was written by her.
Mm-hmm.
So Babs is a name that one of my coworkers gave me, and it just felt right. But who I am is I am a professional woman who spent her career teaching women to speak out for themselves while I had difficulty speaking for myself. So this is the first time that I'm publicly telling my story. And in addition to being this person who's out there and vulnerable, I am a grandmother of 12. I am a certified jazzercise instructor, hence these muscles that you see. Um, I am a person who has a large family, not by birth, but by heart, people that I've met on this journey who share the same soul and willingness to make a difference.
And I love the idea of having your chosen family, for your chosen extended family, because sometimes we're born into a family and that's given to us, decided for us. But when you choose your own people, your own tribe, that makes that relationship even so much better. And thank you for sharing your own experience. And actually, when I was trying to look up your information about your book, Barbara Walters, the famous Barbara Walters, kept on coming up. So I had to put the Babs, and that's how I was able to see it. So that's really interesting to do. I just thought, did I misspell the last name? Was the Walters spelled differently? So thank you for saying that. So let's begin with your book title, Facing the Jaguar. So when I close my eyes and think about if I'm standing and looking straight in the eye of jaguar, what would I see? What kind of feeling would I get looking at it? It was so evocative. I had to think about what jaguar would look like if I saw a jaguar in the forest, stood in front of it, eye to eye. What would that look like? So I want you, if you don't mind sharing with us, what does the jaguar represents in your story?
Well, you probably know this better than most people, but when trauma with a big T happens to people, we have a tendency to disassociate from it because otherwise you would not be able to survive. In order to live, we have to separate ourselves from some of the things that are happening. And for me, the way that I separated myself is I pictured this wild beast chasing me. And I knew that I couldn't stop, that I had to keep running and that I could never give up. So the wild beast was the terror of my life that I was trying not to deal with, or I didn't know how to deal with when I was very young. The eyes were on fire and the fangs were hanging low, and the saliva and the growl that was coming out of his mouth and the fury, that's what just kept me going until the day I was able to confront it.
Confronted, yeah. So the idea of the jaguar as the beast you're running away from, is it something that you can see in retrospect and you look back and you see what this jaguar represented in the process of surviving? Or is it something that came to you and you were aware of it during that flight when you're trying to survive the beast?
Well, that's really a good question. Off the top of my head, I would say that at the time, I didn't know the symbolism of what I was doing. It was my creative mind or my resilience, whatever I needed to draw on, that I couldn't have given it a name. I was too young to be able to tell you what it was. But in retrospect, to your point, yes, it absolutely was something that I understand now.
That's really interesting because, like you said at the beginning, when we are in the middle of the trauma, there is something within us in a human capacity that stops you from looking at the jaguar in the face, if we continue to use that symbol, because to look at it in the face means to be destroyed. So, in order for you not to be destroyed, then you can't look at it in the face until you are far enough distance that you know if you looked at it, you'll still have enough distance to get away from it. It's not going to devour you right away. So that's how I see it in my personal life. When I face trauma, it doesn't really come up right away.
Yeah, actually, what you just said made me feel like I was in a therapy session because nobody's ever languaged it quite that way, Fartumo. But yes, there are demons in everybody's life and horror. I don't think you escape this life that we're in without some trauma, but some of it is really heavier and more serious. And you would not be able to breathe if you actually opened your eyes and looked at it.
That's really interesting. So, you carried a secret for decades, almost 70 years. And for me, every time I think about challenging situations in my life and other people that I speak to, I realized the silence is actually the shroud that covers all trauma, all the challenges, all the abuse, all the violence we face is covered by that silence. Not only the silence of the person doing it, but the silence those around us that are watching and not doing anything. And that's why I always say silence is a permission for the violence to continue. So, can you take us to the moment you first decided you are going to share it and break your own silence? And what do you think that emotional process for you to get from running away from it to facing it? What did that emotional process look like for you at the time?
Well, you asked about three questions there, but I'm going to take one at a time. I didn't know what was happening to me because I did not have the language to describe what was happening. And because I was disassociating, I wasn't actually watching what was happening. I was just feeling it. So one day when I was at home by myself, I was reading an encyclopedia, and after the Incas of Peru and incense, I found the word incest, and it described, from what I believe to be the correct legal point of view, after all, who writes encyclopedias? It described what the world thought was happening to me. And it said that incest is sexual relations between two people too closely related by blood to marry. And nowhere in that definition did it say anything about the pain, the fear, or how somebody who was unwillingly involved in that relationship would be able to live with it. So I felt so alone in the world. I thought there was not another human being at that moment that could understand what I was feeling. And I made a promise to myself that someday I would write a book and some other little girl would not feel so all alone. Now, obviously, I didn't write it when I was a girl because I had a lot of work to do. And you brought up an interesting thing about the weight of keeping secrets. I've done some research and I've learned that there is a physical weight to keeping silence and keeping a secret and holding down emotions, whether it's anger and you push it down and suppress it until it becomes depression, or you end up with physical illnesses and emotional problems. So I spent the next 40 and 50 years trying to heal myself from what had happened. And I committed myself to working with family secret keepers. Now, not everybody has the same secret. Some people's secrets are quite different than mine, but that doesn't mean they're still not traumatic and a burden. People have told me about abortion that they were ashamed of, or bankruptcy in the family, or a family member that was institutionalized. I mean, so many secrets. So the idea of sharing secrets is to lift the burden and to be able to move on. And I believe that there's no change in any area of life without awareness. So until we can speak some of these secrets, we're not going to be able to make much of a change as a community or a culture. I don't know if I answered all of your questions with that one. Did I leave something out?
So the last one would be what the emotional process of getting yourself to say, okay, I am going to share it. What did that look like?
Well, anybody who's been through child sexual abuse or physical abuse or emotional abuse can tell you that there's a certain amount of shame and guilt to the person who's the victim, not because we asked for it, not because we deserved it, but maybe because we didn't speak up sooner, or maybe because in trying to protect our family, our emotions are confused. We love and hate the same person. We need that person. That's the adult that's supposed to protect us. So in my healing, I had to not only get past what happened to me, I had to work on what I learned about myself through the way I was being treated and how I attracted other people into my life out of not understanding that I had worth and value. And that's why it took me so long.
Yeah, that's really deep and very difficult. In watching your other interviews, some of the things I get is the difference you make between what happens to us and the meaning we give it to it. Something happens to you that was beyond your control. Tragically, the person was supposed to protect you that's inflicting this upon you. But then, in order for you to speak to it, then you have to change the meaning. So,
Yeah.
how did your personal meaning of what happened to you in that traumatic experience evolve as you moved from silence to expression?
Well, I think that the first thing that happened to me that helped me was I was able to leave my family home. And I did that through marriage because that was what was the most acceptable way for me. And having my own family, having my children. gave me an opportunity to build a new family. And I know that I was not a perfect mother, but I know that I was nowhere near the parents that I had. So I started healing myself by reparenting myself. And in that process, once my children were grown and really successful adults,
Mhm.
I realized that I still had time to keep this promise that I made to myself. And I realized I was doing it every day in my corporate work with the women that I was working with and teaching. And from there, I said to myself, do I want to always be a victim? No, I am not a victim anymore. I built a family, I built a career, I healed myself, but I have some very special role because not everybody can do what I can do. I can speak publicly, I can write, and I can engage people in wanting to hear some difficult things. And through that, I made the decision that I was going to create meaning and purpose. Otherwise, all this chaos was useless. So I'm choosing this time in my life when most of my peers are retired to take what happened and to help people understand I don't have answers. I don't have a formula. I don't have advice. All I have is this lived experience of how I took a horrible situation and through my work, particularly through writing, and I know you write as well, this memoir really helped me see my parents in a whole different light and to be able to give them grace. And through that, I never realized I would be giving myself grace too. So I feel better prepared to take my message and find other secret keepers and help them share their messages.
So, one of the most powerful elements in your story, and even answer to that question, is how in generational silence shapes the way we interpret trauma, the way we interpret challenges, the way we interpret life itself, until we convert that into something that says, I'm not going to repeat. Like you said, you try to do different than your parents have done, and understanding your parents with their limitations, with their challenges. So understanding them doesn't mean you're accepting what happened. Understanding only means that it's not your fault. It's not for you to decipher. You understand it in that sense of saying it was that person's challenge. So, my next question to you is, how do you think family patterns of silence and denial could impact the way we process trauma?
Well, scientists talk about epigenetics, and I don't know that there's a way to actually measure that, but they say that we have cellular memory the same way that our skin color or eye color comes through one of our parents or the genes of our grandparents. So in exploring what my parents had been through and what my grandparents had been through, I began to see how everything was connected. And that connection gave me an opportunity to have empathy for them, separate from what they did to me. Because there's a part of me that still wants to say, why didn't you do better? But they couldn't do any better. They did the best that they could. And while that's a cliche, when you see their history, any logical person would agree that they were damaged. And fortunately for me, I had something that none of them had. And I'm here speaking to you today.
That's very interesting. And I always ask, I teach high school students, and I always ask them, how old were you when you realized your parents were human? Not human in the biological sense, but at some point when you're a child, you perceive your parents to have all the answers. And if they're doing something that's not safe, you assume that's how things are done because you don't have anything else to compare it to, and you think they are these perfect beings that have all the answers, and the way they do it, even if it hurts, must be the way everybody else is doing it. And at some point we get to a point where we can hopefully switch that lens and see them as humans with their flaws and limitations and shortcomings, and some of it really being difficult to deal with. This is not to justify people's misdeeds, but to allow us, those of us that are struggling with it, to say, this is a situation that I am facing, and this happened to me, but didn't mean I was broken, didn't mean I deserve it, didn't mean I didn't deserve a better treatment. So, my next question to you is, what do you want listeners to this episode, especially those who are still living in silence, to know about breaking that silence even later in life? Because somebody might feel it's too late. I'm 30, I'm 40, I'm 50. But what does that look like, even if it's later in your life?
Well, I tell people it's never too late. As you know, I'm an octogenarian. So, I mean, you would think that's pretty late, but more than that, it's not too late. Healing is really a journey. It's not a destination that you get to one day and you say, okay, I'm finished. I've done everything. Because it's a journey, there's always more healing that you can do. And when we are healed, we're able to help others. So, you know how, like, one of my friends is a trainer, and she always says, you know, when you're on the airplane and the oxygen mask comes down, they always tell you put it on yourself first before you help a child that's with you.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is us putting the oxygen on ourselves. It might feel a little selfish, or it might not be the way that we think it should be, but it's helpful to know that everything that you do towards your healing brings you to a higher level. And on my website, I have a couple of, a couple of freebies that I give out that are helpful for people in determining whether they're ready to tell. One is a checklist, and it's called How to Tell When You're Ready to Tell. And it breaks uh, the silence into three categories. You know, maybe you're just thinking about it, and you're going to write it on a piece of paper and tear it up and flush it down the toilet. Or maybe you're really feeling troubled and you want to speak to a professional or a good friend. Or maybe you are ready to stand up and say something.
Mm-hmm.
So the checklist is helpful in that. And then I have anonymous postcards so that anybody who's ready to tell their secret can send it in anonymously. We do not post anybody's name. The only one who sees it is me. And what I found a lot of people are doing is choosing a new email address so that we don't really follow up with them. Whatever makes you feel comfortable, it's like a God card. So there are ways to start by just tipping your toe into the water, and there are ways to start by marching forward. But wherever you are, it's important to respect where you are. Everybody's experience is different.
I really love how you explained that, the idea of having these anonymous cards. That's just beautiful. And the link to Bab's website would be in the show notes. And then you can click and get to those cards, postcards that you can, if you wanted to share, or even get the checklist to see if you are ready, if something is weighing heavily on you. So you mentioned early on this concept of secret keeper, which I love. I've never heard that being used before. So I really love that idea of almost lifting the weight from the person, that they are secret keepers. So you mentioned how you were your family's secret keeper. How do you think keeping that role shaped you? And what happened when you finally stopped and said, I'm not going to keep this anymore?
Well, probably not surprising to you. Several times when I tried to share the secret, the people that I chose to share it with were not able to respond the way that I needed or even hear it. So there's a lot of denial, a lot of closing ranks, people protecting my parents. I understand that now was painful at the time that it happened. But something happened to me in one of my volunteer jobs. We did oral histories with a group of senior citizens, and one of the men had kept a secret for 65 years. He was a Holocaust survivor,
Mm-hmm.
and in order to survive, he had to do things that he thought were unconscionable. He couldn't think about what he was doing. He thought he was as bad as the Nazis. But when he shared the story, and they didn't have to share it, we just recorded for them, but he decided to share it with the group.
Mm-hmm.
The support and the love that he received, he came in the next week and he said that had he known that there was a listening and a witnessing, he would not have carried that burden with him. He never told anybody for 65 years. And that was my first insight into the fact that this is not just about me. There are secrets out there. The secret that I hear more than anything else is alcoholic parents. For some reason, there's a lot of that. So many different secrets. And one of my cousins just found out at 70 that she was adopted, and what a difference that made to her in finding out who her birth mother was and what her birth mother's um, physical ailments were. Information would have been important for her to know. So I took this idea of keeping secrets outside of my story
Mm-hmm.
and started to share it. And the more that I do, the more secrets I hear.
Mm-hmm. And I love how you answer that question of what finally happens when you stop, which is the example of that man who carried this secret that he thought nobody would ever wanted to hear. And he felt, like you said, as terrible as the Nazis, which is the worst kind of human beings we can think about. So that's really interesting. So, but those of us that are secret keepers, you might be surprised when you finally tell the outcome. It would be not only that weight that's going to be lifted off you, but you might be surprised the reaction that comes towards you. So, writing a memoir is not just a telling a story. When I write fiction, that's a telling a story. But writing a memoir, especially the kind you write, is reliving of something that happened, like staring in that jaguar eye to eye, facing it finally, and stopping from running away. What I want to know is what was the hardest part about writing Facing the Jaguar? Not only writing it, but actually facing it so you can document for the rest of us to read.
Well, in order to write language that people will want to read and not be horrified by, you have a double burden with this type of memoir. One is you have to relive everything so that you can bring the reader into that scene. But two, you have to write it in a way that allows people to understand without giving them the pain as well. So that was a really big challenge because there were things that I would have described in more detail or people that I would have exposed more, but I was kind to the reader and kind to them. I think the hardest part for me, though, for Tumo, was my children, because this book was not written for them. If I was going to write a family memoir and keep it for as a legacy, it would be a different book. I wrote this one specifically for those family secret keepers, for those other people that are in their healing process and need to hear what's possible and some ideas about how to do it.
I really like how you explain the layers of that experience. Not only are you reliving in what happened to you as a child when you were powerless to stop it, now you are giving that same burden, or at least that's the feeling you get, giving that burden to anyone who reads your book or listens to your book. So that's really an interesting balance to set. So what I want to ask you now is, all of us, when we write both memoir and fiction, it's almost like sending your baby out to the world, where whatever they do, whatever they accomplish, will look bad or good, and we're always worried about that. So your books, those of us that write, become our babies. I want to ask you, what is something that surprised you once the book was out in the world and the readers began to respond?
Well, I have to tell you, I was shocked by how many books I sold the first month. I don't think I know that many people on the planet. So it wasn't like it was just my friends, my family, and my community.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow the word was spread farther. I know my book launch party, we had invited 65 people and we ended up with 90.
Mm-hmm.
It's like some of those are just numbers, but what started to happen once I started speaking was people who had the same experience as I did
Mm-hmm.
came forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that touched me because that was the little girl that I was trying not to feel all alone.
Mm-hmm.
And here I was trying to help them not feel alone. And I wasn't alone.
Mm-hmm. And you found a community in that, right? Community
Yes.
of people who are not are not just coming to read a book, but coming to share their own experience. And it's almost becoming reciprocal, it sounds like, where there is a deeper connection beyond reading a book and selling a book that comes to play. And I really love that idea. So
Well, you probably have that with fiction too, because I remember as a child reading a book and thinking that the author was talking only to me,
mhm,
directly to me, like there was
yeah,
nobody else.
yes. For me, I also write about issues, even though fictionalized, that impact women and girls, and how that, whether it's the consequence of war, other assaults, violence against them. So that's mainly what my topics are. So now you work with survivors and you teach journaling and lead workshops. What do you think is the connection between telling your story and healing from the trauma? What is the relationship between this idea of storytelling so you can heal?
I did a program with drug and alcohol abuse people in residence, women, and they were there because they were either mandated or their families put them in this residence. And when we were doing the journal writing, and we did a lot of creative journal writing, some with arts and crafts, some with dance, a theme came through the writing that was not connecting for people beforehand. And at least 50% of these women had sexual abuse in their lives. A number of them only had physical abuse. But here we have people, we're treating them for drugs and alcohol, and we're not treating the underlying cause. So through the writing, these connections started to take place. The same way that the connection came to me when I researched where my parents and grandparents had been. It's like everybody's putting a piece of the puzzle in there. But when you start putting pieces next to other people's, you get to see a bigger picture.
Oh wow, that's really really interesting, and that will get me to my next question. That you also touch the institutional harm and how institutions deal with the symptoms, not the source of why is this person choosing to do drugs or choosing to drink. What is the underlying traumatic experience that we need to deal with before we can deal with the person's habit of drinking or habit of using drugs? So I think whether it's the medical institution or any other institution, we tend, maybe our limitations of not having the resource or whatever it might be, we tend to deal with the symptoms, not really the cause of the illness or the ailment these people are struggling with. And I found that to be true as I was dealing with my daughter being in a violent relationship for 18 years, trying to deal with the legal system and the healthcare system, and even now as we go through the criminal justice system. It's such a difficult place to navigate and maintain that human touch. So, my question to you is what needs to shift, especially when we have tight knit communities? And when I say tight knit communities, is those tight knit communities, the concept of shame, not speaking to it, really plays. So, how do we make that shift in especially tight knit communities for survivors to feel safe so they can speak to what's really beneath all these challenges?
I'm a member of a group called the Incest Aware Alliance. And everybody in that organization works towards repairing exactly what you're talking about. So right now we're developing some training that we're going to be using with clinicians, with social workers, with teachers. Another group is working on strictly from a judicial point of view. What do we have to lobby for? What do we have to fight for? What laws have to change so that people will be treated more humanely instead of just a docket number? If we don't teach the professionals who are the ones that are interacting with survivors, then we can't really expect them to understand. It's a huge job. I don't believe that we're going to see this change in our lifetime, but I know that we're working toward it. As a Jewish woman, I'm taught that it's my responsibility to repair the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I told you this when we first spoke. The world is just so messed up right now that I don't know where to put my attention first.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm focusing on my corner of it. And my corner is really includes education,
Mm-hmm.
but education in the area that you're doing right now, making change by bringing awareness, taking those difficult topics that don't get discussed at the dinner table and putting it out there for public consumption. It takes a lot of courage to expose ourselves this way. We're still vulnerable and we're still healing,
Mm-hmm.
but it's up to us to speak loud and to take care of teaching other people so that
Mm-hmm.
they can speak as loud.
Thank you very much for saying that. My firm belief is that there is no hero coming. Not the one that wears a cape to sweep down and fix this. Whatever we have in this earth, it's ours to do. And one person is speaking like you and I, and two people coming together is better than all of us keeping silent. Because if we keep silent, then what? And my thing is, if not us, then who's going to do it? And if not now, then when are we going to do this? So if someone is listening to this episode today and they're holding a truth, they're keeping a secret, they are the secret keeping in a family, in a relationship, in a household, in a community, they've never said out loud, what would you tell them?
Well, it's very difficult if they're in a dangerous situation to advise someone about speaking. But if there's one person that you trust, even if they are not able to do anything to help you, it's still an opportunity to find your words, to be able to think through what's happening to you and maybe come up with a plan. In my book and on my website, I have resources listed for people who need to have a professional to speak to, whether it's suicide prevention or it could be child sexual abuse. But what's important is to find something to read, journal write. You don't need to have proper language when you write in a journal. It doesn't have to be grammatically correct or punctuation. Even stream of consciousness will help. Find a way to find your voice. And if you're lucky, find someone who can listen.
That's good. Find someone who can listen. But above all, remember you're not alone. If you're facing challenges, there are other people in your closest circle that are facing the same thing that might not say it. Just because we didn't speak to it doesn't mean you're the only one facing that situation or keeping that secret. So how was Facing the Jaguar, writing it, facing it. I don't even want to say you wrote it. And I want to kind of like insist on this idea of you facing the jaguar. And I really love, I don't know how you came up with the jaguar as the beast, but I can just see the different colors or layers of a jaguar that kind of like almost would show the layers of that trauma. So I wanted to know how has facing the jaguar changed your life?
Well, obviously, the first confrontation was with my father, my sister, and he explained to us why he behaved the way he did. And there was a certain amount of freedom in that because he did not accept any responsibility. He blamed his parents, he blamed my mother, he blamed the reform school that he was in. He was strictly the victim. It's an interesting thing in all of your relationships. You have to ask yourself, what's the common denominator? And the common denominator is always you. You're always there in every relationship. Well, he had all of these horrible relationships, and he just helped me right away in separating myself from blaming him. I stopped blaming him. Then, when I confronted my mother's bottom line to me was, well, at least you got away. So my mother was still a victim too. And that gave me a lot of freedom to not be a victim because I did not want to be like them.
Mm-hmm.
And to not be a victim meant not that I was responsible for what happened to me, but I was responsible for what I was going to do next and what I was going to do with what happened to me. So all of those steps helped bring me closer to where we are today.
So, what do you know now after the book had been out into the world that you wish you would known sooner or then before you even put the book out?
Obviously, I wish I would have written it sooner and not waited 69 years to do it. But I think that the amount of healing that my book has brought to the world already has been so precious that I am not this damaged, shameful, guilt-ridden person, that I'm somebody who could make a difference in another person's life. And I think each of us have the ability to do that in our own way with our own stories.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Your courage, your wisdom, and your voice, they are truly a gift to anyone who hears or reading your book. And I know our listeners will carry this conversation with them. To everyone listening, Facing the Jaguar is not just a book, it's a mirror. And perhaps for you, it will be a door. You can find links to Bab's book and the work in the episode description. If you or someone you know is carrying a silence that's become too heavy, know this: there is life on the other side of telling your truth. Babs, thank you for joining us.
Fartumo, thank you. You touched my heart.
Thank you, thank you. I really appreciate you giving me your time. And those of you listening, until next time, keep breaking the silence so we can build a better future. Until next week, thank you for joining us. And please share, follow, like, and subscribe to the show. Bye for now. Welcome to Break the Silence, Build the Future, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of survivors and advocates while shedding light on the pervasive issue of gender based violence. Join us on a journey where survivors find strength in sharing their stories and experts offer profound insight into this critical societal issue.